Hey everyone, let's dive straight into today's explainer. We're looking at a really intense, incredibly complex, and frankly fascinating analysis of the family law system. Today, we're exploring the harrowing family court journey of one man, Kyle McLean Smith. By walking through his deeply personal and documented struggles, we can start to unpack the systemic mechanics of something called legal formalism. We're going to look at exactly what happens when personal trauma collides with a massive bureaucracy, and examine what it looks like when the institutions designed to protect us seemingly start operating against us. $10,000. Yeah, we absolutely have to start right here, because this shockingly low number represents some staggering financial devastation. According to the source material, 10 grand is the amount Kyle sold his portion of a condo for. We're talking about selling real estate for essentially pennies on the dollar. But you know, what's truly captivating here isn't just that it was a terrible real estate transaction. It's the underlying reason why this transaction happened in the very first place.
The absolute desperation behind this loss is captured perfectly in Kyle's own words. He says, "I sold my condo for $10,000 so that I could speak to Emily's mother. I didn't have a lawyer to hand over my part of our condo." According to Kyle's account, this massive financial loss was not your standard negotiation. Not at all. It was a desperate trade for human connection. He alleges he made this enormous sacrifice under the specific condition that it would grant him the right to simply speak with his mother-in-law, Zorana, right in the middle of this chaotic family dispute. But, as we're going to see, it was a totally broken promise.
Section 1. The $10,000 coercion. Let's look at the timeline of bureaucratic maneuvers that engineered this financial devastation.
Okay, when you look at this timeline, the cascading bureaucratic failure is just wild. Step 1. Kyle reports he was physically locked out of his own property. He literally had to hire a locksmith just to access his own home after giving legal notice to tenants. Step 2. By month 7 of this whole ordeal, his legal counsel drops him, forcing him to navigate an incredibly complex court battle entirely unrepresented. Step 3 brings us right back to that desperate condo sale. He's giving up his real estate equity for a mere $10,000 just to establish contact with Zorana. And finally, Step 4, the condition goes completely unfulfilled.
So, the core takeaway here? This wasn't just a financial misstep. In Kyle's view, this was financial devastation engineered as a calculated piece of psychological leverage. The sources detail how the opposing counsel was fully in control of the transaction, and the promise to speak with Zorana, literally the only condition of this massive financial sacrifice, was never honored. He was stripped of his assets in exchange for absolutely nothing.
Section 2. The divorce industrial complex. Let's zoom out a bit from Kyle's personal tragedy and look at the broader framework he uses to describe his experience.
Kyle uses a very specific phrase for this, the divorce industrial complex. He views the system not as a tool designed for conflict resolution, but as an extractive machine. According to this framework, it's a profit-driven structure that targets families during their absolute most fragile moments. It's allegedly designed to drain their resources and impoverish vulnerable individuals.
So how does this actually work in practice? The sources break Kyle's claims down into these key points. First, he alleges the system actively weaponizes a lack of family support, meaning if you don't have a built-in safety net, you are an easy target for asset extraction. Second, it completely disregards the severe psychological toll on the people involved. Third, it heavily penalizes anyone who falls outside standard socioeconomic norms. And finally, from his perspective, the system functions as a mechanism for pure destruction rather than any sort of path to justice.
Which brings us to this quote. And man, this is a heavy, heavy accusation. Kyle alleges that this system operates as, quote, domestic abuse scaled by the state itself. Now, as an explainer, it's crucial we impartially report the gravity of this claim. He argues that by completely ignoring human pain and actively facilitating coercion and asset liquidation, the state itself is actually scaling up the mechanics of abuse, leveraging the massive power of the courts against individuals who don't have formal representation.
To really capture what it feels like inside this environment, the sources use this wild but incredibly vivid metaphor, a house of mirrors. It describes a fast-moving, personality-driven system that just easily breaks down. Kyle argues that society is currently relying on highly precarious, chaotic, and completely subjective legal rulings. I mean, think about it. When you're in a house of mirrors, nothing is objective, right? It's all just a distorted reflection. And he argues that perfectly sets the stage for systemic coercion. Section 3. Weaponizing legal formalism. Let's contrast the idealized version of the justice system with the rigid reality Kyle claims to have faced.
Okay, we're looking at two very different concepts here. On the left is ideal due process. That's the social contract we all hope for, focused on finding the truth and ensuring fairness. But on the right, we have legal formalism. This is a strict, rigid adherence to procedural rules. Now, why does this matter to you? Because we all enter legal agreements hoping for that ideal process on the left. But Kyle's framework argues that in family law, this rigid formalism on the right is actively weaponized. Instead of being used to achieve justice, procedural rules are used to obscure the truth, drain a self-represented party's resources, and aggressively coerce outcomes.
To make this super concrete, let's look at the documented instances of legal formalism used against Kyle. He was forced to perform complex legal duties remotely while under extreme duress. He was physically locked out of his own home. He was subjected to threats of jail time from a judge. And amidst all this intense procedural maneuvering, he was denied even basic confirmation regarding the safety and well-being of his ex-wife, Emily. The procedure entirely overrode the basic human element.
Section 4. The Charter Challenge Strategy. So how does an individual even begin to fight back against bureaucracy like this? Kyle's strategy relies heavily on a really fascinating game theory concept called a Schelling point. Basically, this represents a focal point where people naturally tend to coordinate their behavior even if they aren't communicating directly. It's like a giant beacon. Kyle believes that fighting a systemic issue like the divorce industrial complex requires creating a massive, highly visible Schelling point, an undeniable legal and social rallying point for society.
And this is where it gets absolutely wild. Part of building that focal point involved uncovering this shocking piece of internal research about Canadian law. It turns out fundamental property rights were actually left entirely out of the Canadian Constitution back in the 1980s due to a political compromise. Kyle attributes his total loss of assets, including that devastating $10,000 condo coercion, directly to this specific constitutional void. He argues this massive loophole is exactly what allows bad actors, and a procedurally rigid system, to just completely strip individuals of their wealth.
So here is his strategic playbook to actually force accountability. Step 1, anchor these grievances in foundational, historical civil rights. Think the Magna Carta. Step 2, secure a specialized legal team capable of taking on the federal government. And Step 3, launch a highly visible charter challenge. This acts as the icebreaker case, marrying U.S. textualist philosophy with a Canadian living tree philosophy to force the issue of property rights directly into the public and legal eye. Which brings us to the end of today's explainer, and I want to leave you with this profound, really provocative question. Can a legal system designed to protect citizens actually turn them into outlaws? When procedural rules override the truth, and when your property can be stripped away for pennies on the dollar under broken promises, it kind of forces us all to reflect deeply on the very nature of justice. It's a heavy question for sure, but one that Kyle McLean Smith's journey demands we ask. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I definitely encourage you to keep exploring these fascinating legal frameworks. See you next time.